I'm Chaz Kalenda, and I'm running to be the next Rhode Island Attorney General. I've practiced law for the last 16 years, 12 of them in the office of the Attorney General, so I have the knowledge and experience to do that job at a high level. I'm not here to fight for a political agenda. I'm not here to fight for a special interest. I'm here to fight for the rights of every Rhode Islander, no matter where you come from or no matter what your background is. I'll need your votes on September 13th for the primary election and November 8th for the general election. If you have any questions about where to vote or how to vote, please contact your local Board of Canvassers or the Secretary of State's office or website. I'm not running to be just another politician. I'm running to be a public servant who can serve as a much-needed check and balance on the state of Rhode Island to root out the corruption both inside and outside of our system. We need your support. You can visit my website at chas4ag.com to learn more about me, donate, or volunteer your time. I'm Chaz Kalenda, and I approve this message.
To take home the Golden Gloves, you've got to put in the work, and you've got to be tough as nails. Ashley Kalis was driven to achieve. Today, Kalis is still fueled by that same hope, grit, and determination. A mother of 3 school-aged boys and successful business owner who ran testing and vaccination sites across the state. Kalis is the fighter Rhode Island needs right now because it's time for a change. Ashley Kalis for governor.
Good evening. Welcome back to the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. For those new joining the program, my name is Irina Zuckerman, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. Today with us, we have Dr. Cynthia Farahat. She is a writer, she's an author. We'll be discussing her new book about the Muslim Brotherhood today, but she is also a co-founder of a liberal party back in Egypt, and she is a fearless warrior who has nearly been killed by the subject of her most recent work while dealing with a lot of personal health issues and trying to break through to audiences all over the world. Thank you so much for joining us today. And before we get into the subject of our discussion, your book, your work, your recent article about whether Muslim Brotherhood is still dangerous, I want the audience to learn a little bit about more about you. I want to hear more about how you got into this area, what motivated you to study Muslim Brotherhood and then to confront it.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I truly appreciate it. And so to begin, I started studying the Muslim Brotherhood and Islamic terrorism and jihadist movements in general because I wanted to understand why I had the problems that I had in Egypt when I was a teenager. Like, for example, at the time under President Mubarak's regime, the government decides where you go to college and what you study. And they do something very sinister. If you are good in a field, they assign you to the exact opposite field to break your spirit at a young age. So I have been an artist since I was 4 years old, and I always wanted to be a sculptor. So I wanted to study art, and the government assigned me to study law and Sharia law. And if someone wants to study Sharia law, they send them to art school. That's a way to break your spirit. And that absolutely devastated me that I wasn't allowed to study art in Egypt. And I started, and there were lots of problems. Being a minority, a Coptic Christian minority, meant that I was targeted all the time. They list your religion on your ID card. So everywhere I went, I was getting persecuted against, and I felt so oppressed. So I wanted to know why things were so bad, especially that Egypt wasn't always like that. My mother didn't have these experiences. My grandmother didn't have these experiences. Egypt was an incredible Mediterranean country like Greece or Italy. There was so much freedom and so much beauty everywhere. So I decided to start studying what people like the Muslim Brotherhood study to become who they are, to be able to predict their behavior. And when 9/11 happened, I felt morally responsible to do something about it, because one of the suicide hijackers was an Egyptian. And I felt that I needed to counter these ideas before they flew into your buildings. And that's why I met with like-minded people on the internet, and we eventually founded the first classic liberal secular political party in the history of modern Egypt. And of course, the government and the Muslim Brotherhood were not happy with that at all. And I continued to study them, and I studied specifically what their lead theologian studied to become who he was. This man is the blind sheikh, called Omar Abdurrahman. He was incarcerated in federal prison in the United States until 2017 for for World Trade Center bombings in the 90s. So this man is the godfather of modern Islamic terrorism. And I studied everything he studied. And that's why after I've had all this knowledge, I felt morally responsible to share it with the world, because I have to stop these guys. And that's why I got on Al-Qaeda's hit list. That's why they almost assassinated me on October 9th, 2011. They kidnapped my brother and tortured him in February 2011, made me listen. So I have endured a lot of hardship because of this, because I decided to confront this group and do what is morally, the only moral choice I had. There was no, because I'm either part of the problem or part of the solution. There is no middle ground.
Well, first I'd like to say that how sorry I am about these terrible experiences, and not even talking about being assigned to study something you don't wish to study. To be honest with you, when the state does something like that, they're punishing themselves, because, you know, in this case, it worked out because you developed a fascination that you were able to use for something positive, but many times it just produces very subpar and mediocre professionals in whatever industry, and stagnates the country, and everybody's miserable, and nobody's achieving anything. That's the only conclusion that you can draw from doing something like that. But aside from that, I want to talk about these three horrible traumatic incidents that you mentioned, because of something very important in the United States. The US has not designated Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. The reason, the typical excuse, justification by professionals across the board has been because it does not meet the legal definition of a terrorist organization, in that Muslim Brotherhood is thought to be funding terrorists but not directly engaging in violence. What you're telling me directly contradicts that information. You're saying that Muslim Brotherhood was engaged in terrorism of individuals, and as well as its critics, in violent attacks with a political purpose.
The Muslim Brotherhood is not only doesn't only occasionally engage in terrorism. The reason I called my book The Secret Apparatus is because that's what they call their terrorism apparatus. They tell Western academics and intelligence agencies and politicians, oh, we dismantled our terrorism apparatus in the 50s. That's not true. In Arabic, they admit that they're still operating the terrorism apparatus. The terrorism apparatus is responsible for founding and operating groups like Al-Qaeda and Islamic State and Al-Nusra Front. Even the Taliban, they were involved in founding the Taliban. Boko Haram. Give me the name of the Sunni terrorist group, and I will show you how the Muslim Brotherhood was either involved in founding it or founding and operating it. So there is overwhelming evidence that they are a terrorist group. They say it in Arabic. They're proud of it. They brag about it. The subtitle of my book, The Industry of Death, that's not hyperbolic interpretation on my part. That is what they call their mission. They say we are creating an industry of death. That's their own words, not mine. I believe the reason they haven't been designated as a terrorist organization, it's actually not a belief, it's information, is because State Department is working with them. That's the real reason. They're working with them. And that's right from the horse's mouth. That's information, that's not opinion. The US government is working with the Muslim Brotherhood, and that needs to stop because that resulted in absolutely horrific consequences around the world. I would say millions of deaths when you count what they have done, the Muslim Brotherhood regime in Sudan. So they have spread terrorism and mayhem throughout the world for the past 100 years, but they have also successfully subverted and infiltrated the United States government and its intelligence agencies and its education system. There has been systematic infiltration. And they brag about that, by the way. Hassan al-Turabi, a Muslim Brotherhood operative and leader, one of its international leaders, and he said, he died in 2016. Before he died, he said that they control the narrative about the Muslim Brotherhood in US intelligence agencies. That's a quote from Hassan al-Turabi himself. He said that. That's not mine. These are all quotes. So the problem is so severe. It's so severe. I think their infiltration program, they call it in Arabic عملية جهادية حضارية, which translates to civilization jihad operation, and they describe it as destroying the Western miserable house from within. And that's how they're doing it, and they've been doing a fantastic job at it, because between people they bribe, between people they have brainwashed, between successful propaganda campaigns, they have done it. And that's why they haven't been designated as a terrorist group. And what I'm trying to do in my book is show irrefutable evidence from their own writings and their own words that they are terrorists. One of their supreme guides and the heads of the Muslim Brotherhood said in 2005, yes, we are terrorists. What? There is nothing more you can do. And the leader of the Brotherhood says, yes, that's the fifth general guide, says, yes, we are terrorists. We shouldn't be ashamed when they call us terrorists. Yes, we are terrorists. So these are information, all this information is in my book from their own words. There are almost 945 footnotes that prove everything I'm saying. And everyone can fact check my work. Because my mission is to get them designated as a terrorist group. And I've written this book under horrific conditions. I was dealing with breast cancer. I was dealing with multiple sclerosis, but I still wrote it while I was very sick because this has to stop. They have to be stopped to stop the misery across the world.
I couldn't agree more, but that brings me to something very interesting because you raised an important point. First, what you're describing sounds very much like they are following the pattern that has happened in Egypt under the Hosni Mubarak regime. They have penetrated the institutions through soft power, through political means, even as they secretly were involved in operations elsewhere. But as a group, they seem to be doing exactly the same, and they have successfully sold themselves as a mainstream Muslim brand, if nothing else. Most people are not experts in Islam. They cannot verify whether it's true or not, nor do they necessarily want to. So this brings me to another important point. President Trump did consider designating them as a terrorist organization on the basis of information from multiple countries. All of these countries presented him personally with evidence. They presented members of US Congress with evidence, presumably exactly the type of information you are now trying to present to a broader public. How and Secretary Pompeo, who also was CIA's director, he is no shrinking violent, as anyone who's ever seen him understands. He's a confrontational character who was not afraid to call out threats to US security for what they were during his time in office. How is it that lower level officials and all these infiltrated bureaucrats were able to hoodwink people who had both the information and the intent to go through designating a major threat? What exactly happened that they were able to subvert the US government's, the elected officials' will and the will of the people?
So most people who work in these intelligence agencies are heroes and patriots. And I know this for a fact. Like my husband is a retired supervisory special agent, and I cannot count the number of lives this man has saved, including fighting a suicide bomber to save Afghan civilians. So they're mostly heroes, honestly. They would take a bullet for us. But the problem is the leadership. The leadership is so severely corrupt. It's so severely corrupt beyond repair. And then they put their own people in these agencies to be able to make sure that they curb dissent. They are operating them right now in a very, very destructive and subversive way. State Department and the CIA have been standing against the designation, and they cite national security interest as an excuse. No, it's not. No, it's not in our national security interest. It's not our national security interest that we give power to people who are trying to murder us, to the people who perpetrated 9/11. The Muslim Brotherhood perpetrated 9/11, Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, Ayman al-Zawahiri, Abdullah Azzam. The three founders of Al-Qaeda were card-carrying members of the Muslim Brotherhood till the day they died. That's a fact. It's not an opinion. So that makes me crazy. And then when I talked to someone in State Department, and he said something that was absolutely offensive. He said, "Oh, yes, we know they are bastards, but they are our bastards." And they use that language because FDR used that statement to justify his alliance with dictators. Nixon also used that statement to justify alliance with dictators. It has never worked, and it has always backfired.
But here it indicates in this context that the State Department official seemed to be under the impression that the US government has some measure of control over this group, which to me seems to be, with dictators, it may very well be true that it backfires sooner or later, but dictators, individuals, can sometimes be pressured into adhering to particular interests by various means. Muslim Brotherhood is a vast apparatus. How, in the opinion of the State Department officials, does the US have any measure of control over who they are, what they do, and whether or not they represent a threat to US interests? Where was what, in your opinion, did the State Department official have in mind in terms of that relationship?
So I don't know what he was thinking, but I believe there is a lot of antisocial personality disorders, narcissists, people who hate this country, who work in some positions in government. And they ally with these subversive and criminal entities because they believe also in the destruction of Western civilization. Of course, there are useful idiots who believe these narratives, but on specific leadership positions, and specifically the gentleman I talked to, I think that he is a sociopath and he's a narcissist and he hates America. Because when I told him about what the Muslim Brotherhoods were doing to Egyptians, they removed the scalp of my brother's friend. Can you imagine something more horrific? And this kid was a Muslim kid. That's what do you know what he did? He laughed at my face. They laugh at my face when I say these things. They do not have the same reaction that you and I have to these horrific crimes. I have seen these psychopaths in the government, and I believe honestly that that's the reason. That's my opinion.
But how?
I'm not a doctor, but that's my opinion.
But how were they able to subvert the intention of the U.S. president and the head of the State Department at the time, Secretary Pompeo, who are now Secretary Pompeo was a very active person in Congress before he became who he was. He was the head of CIA. He then became. This is an experienced professional. This is not someone who is new and who can be easily manipulated or hoodwinked by appearances. I'm sure he has done his research and has talked to all the relevant officials in other countries. What made him decide to go along with the program? Did they threaten to? What kind of leverage did these people have?
I think President Trump, if he was elected for a second term, he would have designated them as a terrorist group. Just remember, he was fighting on every single front. He had his hands full. But I'm complete. I almost know that he was planning to designate them as a terror group in his second term. I know that. The problem was he truly had a lot on his hands. And I believe that the next Republican president will be able to do that.
There is another former U.S. Presidential candidate who has indeed made efforts to to designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. Of course, I'm talking about Senator Ted Cruz, but his efforts could not go beyond what the administration was willing to do. Moreover, there was a lot of pushback even within congressional circles. Yes, there was some support for his bill, but even to pass the bill, there was a great deal of resistance, including among Republicans. I've discussed this issue with many professionals, why the Republicans tend to not prioritize Muslim Brotherhood as a threat. But if that issue is of such low priority in the Republican Party, how can we be certain that the next president will have the support he needs to make such a step?
That's why your work is important. That's why my work is important, because when I have tried to do it through talking to government officials in Congress, and I have done my share, and it was all in vain. I'm taking the fight to the American people, because the American people are the ones who are going to make the decisions with their vote. These are our people. These are the people who understand the issue, who want to protect their children from these monstrous ideas, who want to see other people in different countries flourish and live in peace. So my faith is completely in America. I have not seen an American who was not working in government who did not support designating them as a terrorist group. Not one. Not one. Can you believe it? Outside these circles, everybody gets it when I tell them these are the facts. What do you think? They get horrified. We should designate them. Everybody agrees, and it's going to happen. It's not a matter of if, it's the matter of when. If you remember, like the mafia was in control of organized crime in America for like 160 years. And then we only hear about them now in movies, in old movies. So the same is going to happen to the Muslim Brotherhood, who, by the way, said that they have borrowed elements from the mafia when they were building the organization.
That's
So just like we got rid of the mafia, we're going to get rid. It's just a matter of when.
it's a very interesting point that you've taken, because I've always opined that it's not necessary in the US to designate them as terrorists in order to destroy them, because just like mafia was not brought down by terrorism designations, but by enforcement of existing laws, such as tax laws, such as RICO conspiracy, which was actually designed with organized crime in mind. The Muslim Brotherhood very much follows the same domestic criminal framework. And the real issue is not going after the Muslim Brotherhood, but identifying who is and who isn't Muslim Brotherhood, because they don't necessarily call themselves that in the United States. They have fronts, they have individuals who share their ideology, but they don't call themselves Muslim Brotherhood. So
Oh, you are so brilliant. You are so brilliant. I have to stop you because this is, you see, this is such a great point. This is such a great point. And what I have done in the book is have 5 different types of ways to be able to identify who is a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. If these 5 conditions all exist in one person, he is a card-carrying member of the Muslim Brotherhood. And no Muslim on planet Earth would fit the 5 criteria that I put in the book. Not a single Muslim would fit that criteria unless he's a card-carrying member of the Muslim Brotherhood. Because it's a covert organization, we have to analyze various elements. Like, I can't remember them from the top of my head, but for example, if they frequently appear in public events that are known to be sponsored and carried out by the Muslim Brotherhood, like conferences, riots, and protests, if they have done it more than once. If the second thing, if they have appeared several times in pictures and like to take pictures with known leaders in the Muslim Brotherhood. And also that helps them, it gives them clout in the organization, for example, when they take a picture with someone like Erdogan. And it also tells you their level in the organization, because you are only allowed to associate with someone in your level in the organization. It's a very, very classist system inside the structure of the Brotherhood. You could also tell by their marital status, because members of the Muslim Brotherhood are forbidden to marry outside the Brotherhood, because this also facilitates their terrorism operations. Because if a guy is calling his brother-in-law, he's just calling his brother-in-law. It's not going to be flagged as him calling a leader of the Brotherhood. They're just family. So they hide, and they say that. They say that they hide their operational tactics in these marital status. And you can even identify where exactly they are in the hierarchy of the group, from who they are married to. Because, like, for example, if you're a head of the secret apparatus, you have to be married from a family that also was in the leadership of the secret apparatus. If you're a lower level soldier, you have to marry from another family If it's a woman, her father has to be also a low-level operative in the secret apparatus and so on. And that's from their own words. So there are ways to detect them. And I mentioned them in the book because, like you said, it's so tough. And the difference between them and the mafia is the mafia wasn't doing that under the guise of religion. The Brotherhood is taking advantage of doing all these horrific crimes, from ritual sacrifice to mass murder to rape to torture, under the guise of religion. So that's why it's tougher to use just laws to go after them. And also designating them as a terror group will stop them from getting jobs at intelligence agencies.
That, however, means that the entire vetting process in the intelligence agencies has to change. The problem is, even if you designate them as such, even if you are able to identify those people, you cannot prevent corrupt bureaucrats from subverting the process. After all, even politicians are not privy to every interview by every intelligence officer. So if you have a corrupt core of allies and fellow travelers, or already established Islamists who are already within that framework, why would they ever enforce the law? They would find any excuse to subvert it.
Yes, and also you need to be their bank accounts. There has to be a very close monitor. If you're going to work at an intelligence agency, your bank account needs to be monitored, because I was offered millions of dollars to tweak my discourse. Imagine that. And I don't have any power. I'm not working. So if someone like me was offered millions of dollars to tweak their discourse, and I have evidence of that, by the way, what are they offering people in influential positions? Look at their bank accounts. They utilize bribes. They also utilize blackmail. The way to also avoid infiltration is to hire people who do not have skeletons in their closets that can be used against them. If someone is constantly cheating on his wife, or if someone is anything that can be used against him for blackmail or for extortion, that should disqualify anyone from working in intelligence agencies. So there are ways to secure this type of infiltration if there is a political and national intention to do so. But unfortunately, that is not. And that's what we're trying to do.
Getting back to the horrific 3 incidents that kind of revealed Muslim Brotherhood for being a lot more than just an ideological foundational group, but in fact that the people involved are actually themselves doing exactly the same thing as what they're funding. What was the outcome of these 3 incidents? What were the circumstances that led to these actions, and has there been any attempt to hold these people accountable? I remember 2011 was the peak of the Arab Spring across a number of countries. We already know that the US government was involved in boosting some of these elements for various well-known at this point reasons, and that there was funding from state actors going towards certain programs to the State Department. All of that information is true, but had this scandalous had these absolutely horrific stories have come out at the time in the West, perhaps it would have subjected US government activity to more scrutiny. So what has happened at the time when you came, you told your story? Where is the outrage? Where is the mass reaction to these horrific events?
So I'll tell you exactly one of the incidents. On October 9th, 2011, I was supposed to go with friends of mine to protest for religious freedom. Okay? This ended up being a total, complete massacre for Christians. They were ran over by military vehicles, and one of my very good friends was shot execution style in the middle of the protest in front of TV cameras. The reason I didn't go that day is because I got a fever that saved my life. But the same night, I got a call from a Muslim Brotherhood official who worked at the government, and he said, "We missed you today, but we are still going to get you." Now, here is what happened. The Muslims in Egypt were horrified and outraged, and they were completely supportive of the Christians who were massacred. That's a reaction. That was amazing. They stood as human shields in front of churches to protect them from the Muslim Brotherhood. So that was a great reaction. Now, what was America's reaction? President Barack Obama went on television and said he urged both sides to restrain themselves. The people who were getting shot in the head and were mutilated, I know someone who was cut in half, severed from the waist. Did he need to restrain himself? How was this guy going to restrain himself? President Barack Obama was flaming these horrific massacres and attacks. He was supporting these attacks. At the same time, he was, and then later, a year later, he blamed the Benghazi terrorist attack on some Coptic Christian who made a movie that nobody ever saw. Now, State Department at the time and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton was aware of the massacre. In my book, I discuss a WikiLeaks email where she was told by Jake Sullivan that the Muslim Brotherhood is going to round up Christians and murder them, and the military is going to make sure that no one intervenes to protect them. Hillary Clinton received that email. What did she do after receiving that email, knowing that the massacre happened and was intentional? What did she do? She supported the Muslim Brotherhood. She came out and supported the Muslim Brotherhood after receiving this information. What do you call these people? What do you call someone like Jake Sullivan who was part of this massacre? He was part of this massacre by providing it legitimacy and political support. What do we call them?
Unfortunately, we call him the National Security Advisor.
Exactly. And you don't get that position in the Democratic Party unless there's a lot of skeletons in your closet. That position has always been held by subversive entities. Always subversive entities have held this position since Harry Hopkins, since FDR. So the problem is deep. It's very deep. And, you know, I'm putting a big target on my back with this book, to be honest with you. Like if I get suicided, you guys should know I'm never gonna commit suicide. If I get suicided, it's not me. That puts a big target because I'm exposing a lot of corruption, both inside the United States and in several Arab countries. Things changed now in these countries, but like in the Mubarak regime and all the governments before him. So I'm exposing a lot of the Brotherhood's dirty secrets because I have almost written everything they have. I've read almost everything they have written. I study them religiously. I would read 12 hours a day. So it's all in the book. And whether they, in 2006, a member of parliament, a Muslim Brotherhood member of parliament said, "No, we respect you, but the first chance we get, we're going to kill you." And I told him, do it, and I'm going to make sure that while I'm rotting in my grave, I'm going to continue to fight you. And I delivered on this promise with this book, because if they kill me, the book continues to fight my battle. So they're just going to turn me into a martyr if they end up delivering on these on all these promises they have.
is there a history of retribution against people who have tried to expose them, whether political, physical violence, or anything else? Because this is the one subject area that does not get a lot of attention. How do they treat their critics?
Oh my God. Oh my God. So a lot, one of the most famous intellectuals against the Muslim Brotherhood called Farahat, and he was a friend of my father. And this man was a hero. He was killed in broad daylight because of what he's doing. One of the biggest heroes in the world right now is commentator Ibrahim Isa. And because he's against the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Azhar University in Egypt issued a fatwa against him, basically excommunicating him from Islam over some stupid minor thing. And Al-Qaeda later said that they are going to assassinate him. So there is a relationship between the Muslim Brotherhood, which controls Al-Azhar University. They issue these religious edicts and excommunicate Muslims, and then they get harassed, killed, kidnapped, or tortured. Or like my brother, they kidnapped my brother and tortured him and made me listen because they wanted me to negotiate. And guess what I did? I refused to negotiate because I knew that if I submit to these guys, they were going to kill him. Because I held my ground, he was returned to me an hour later. If I had agreed to their demands, they wanted me to get on TV and speak well on their behalf. And I said no. And that's why they did this to my brother, and they made me listen while they were breaking his bones. And I can't tell you the trauma and guilt that I still deal with because of this incident. But my brother is an incredible guy. He came all bloodied. I opened the door and he said, "What a small price to pay for freedom." Just an incredible human being. So it's a battle. My friend Michael was killed, and I promised him the day he died that I'm going to expose these monsters. And that book delivers on my promise. So we continue to fight. We continue to fight. And eventually the truth will prevail.
I want to ask a little bit of a sensitive question. My understanding is there's been a bit of a tense relationship between Al-Azhar University and the current Egyptian government. There's been some effort to force some reforms, but ultimately it's still very much tightly controlled by the Muslim Brotherhood and their allies and cohorts. What, if anything, can be done to make more headway in that way? I understand that politically the president simply has no power to replace the head of the organization or to throw out all the imams, and even if he did, it probably would not end well. So why, despite a very strong focus on undermining Muslim Brotherhood through various ways, arresting people, imposing, investigating real estate transactions, providing people with alternative opportunities, breaking the network, that element, that institution remains mostly untouchable?
I'm so impressed by you. I'm just so impressed by you. You know so much. That is a brilliant, nobody has ever asked me that. Brilliant question. So Egypt is a constitutional theocracy. The head of Al-Azhar University actually is more powerful than the president. Every single law, almost every single law that the parliament passes has to be vetted through Al-Azhar, and Al-Azhar proposes laws. And the second article in the Egyptian constitution says that Sharia, the basis of Sharia law, are the source of legislation. And you can't fire the sheikh, the head of Al-Azhar. He has immunity for life. So these terrible conditions were instated by the Muslim Brotherhood in past administrations. Now, Sisi has been trying desperately to peacefully introduce reforms to this organization. The problem is they have almost 300,000 students. They give their students military training. They are a serious threat to the country. If the head of Al-Azhar activates the terrorism cells, I have evidence in my book that they receive military training and jihadist training at the university. If he unleashes these guys, you could have a civil war in Egypt. And that's why President Sisi is in an awful position. But he's incredibly intelligent and diplomatic. I'm a huge fan. Like I wasn't expecting to be a huge fan of his, but I truly, truly, deeply respect this man. He puts his neck on the line to fight these battles, but he has to do it in a way where he doesn't instigate a civil war, because Al-Azhar did threaten it in a veiled way before. So it's not an easy battle. It's easier for any Arabic or Islamic country to reform than Egypt. It's easier for Saudi Arabia than Egypt because of that.
So what we are seeing is a state within a state, which is actually an institution and which is constantly producing new generations of scholars, both to Egypt and all over the world. Yet, some scholars have written extensively claiming that the Muslim Brotherhood is on the verge of dying out throughout the Muslim world, that the people in various countries, including Egypt, are largely disappointed with their lack of governance abilities, mismanagement, corruption, and so forth. And yet you have these generations, there's still a demand of hundreds of thousands of people for that sort of education, and they're still being churned out into the world. Some people leave the Brotherhood, or some people are distance themselves, but others keep churning out. So really, is it accurate to say that the Muslim Brotherhood in the Arab world dying out, or is it fair to say that it's shifting? And if so, how is it shifting?
Well, you are absolutely spot on. The Muslim Brotherhood is like cancer. It's cancer. So, and it behaves exactly like cancer cells. The way they duplicate, the way they metastasize, the way they change their type, it's just like cancer. So while Egypt and most Arab countries, the population despises the Muslim Brotherhood. Oh my God. If you look at Arabic television, you'd be shocked at the things they say at the Muslim Brotherhood. They make me sound so moderate. So they're truly despised and hated. But there is a segment in society that Al-Azhar specifically targets, and that's the segment of people who are under the line of poverty, that are able, and their parents send them to become Al-Azhar sheikhs because they're going to make money doing all this propaganda, and maybe they have their own TV show and become billionaires and millionaires. So there's a segment of society that sends their kids to Al-Azhar. Like, you would never ever see an upper middle class person going into Al-Azhar University. Never. And rarely middle class, rarely. It's usually people who are extremely poor and uneducated who are the target of this organization.
So the natural response to that, of course, is exactly what Egypt has been trying to do, which is to give financial opportunities and incentives for people to get education and not get engaged in this sort of institution. But here we're seeing a contradiction. On the one hand, you have clear examples of these policies and these efforts. On the other hand, you have Qatar coming in with major investments into the energy fields, very much needed, but Qatar comes with its own strings attached. It never does anything out of the goodness of its heart, and it has a history of supporting Muslim Brotherhood financially all over the world. So there is no question that if there are any groups to hang into, Egypt would be a very primary target. You also have the Biden administration that is being extremely unhelpful in that regard, and quite frankly is defending Egyptian Brotherhood through human rights initiatives, now blackmailing Egypt with humanitarian aid and military aid, which is again desperately needed. You have a conflation of crises like the food security issue all over plaguing developing nations. How, given these factors, how is it still possible to prevail under these circumstances in this battle?
So you also touched upon something very important. The Qatari regime is not only supporting the Muslim Brotherhood because they like them or because they're naive or because they're using them. I'm proving in my book that the Qatari lead regime is a card-carrying member of the Muslim Brotherhood. They're members of the Brotherhood. So they have also, the Qatari foreign minister has admitted on video, and I transcribed his words in my book, that Qatar does indeed fund terrorism. Qatar should be designated as a state sponsor of terrorism because they are, and there is absolutely overwhelming evidence, and they fit the criteria. So that's how we should counter them. They have to be stopped. Qatar was involved in mediation between the United States and the Taliban. They are the reason that Afghanistan is now an international jihadist training camp, because of the work between the US and Qatar, and specifically Ambassador Zalmay Khalilzad, who was the head of the so-called reconciliation something, and he architected this surrender to the Taliban, and Qatar was at the forefront of putting the ideological plan. So Khalilzad was just implementing the Qatari vision of what they wanted to do. They legitimized the Taliban. They are funding Islamic State. They're funding the Brotherhood. They're working with Iran, for example. That's something else that my book shows, that Qatar is working with Iran.
So I'm going to ask a straightforward question that so far no one has been able to answer to my satisfaction, but I keep trying. Maybe maybe one day I'll succeed. Al-Ula agreement has brought Qatar and its financial institutions, its diplomatic presence, its intelligence apparatus back on the ground to the very countries that were fighting the Brotherhood and assorted Islamist groups the hardest: Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Egypt. Now Qatar is everywhere, back in full force. You're having financial transactions. You're having Qatar's involvement in major projects in those countries. You are having Qatar being involving in energy. You have Qatar diversifying its own resources as a result. How can the Muslim Brotherhood not grow stronger and come back with a vengeance in all these places?
Of course, and that's why there has to be sanctions against them, and they have to be designated state sponsor of terror, and people should be banned from trade with Qatar. And we actually can do that. We can move the Uday base to the UAE. We don't need the biggest US base is outside of America is in Qatar. Why is it in Qatar? They're spying on Americans over there. It should be to a friendly country like the UAE, and they have the space, they have the facilities, they have it all.
But here's my question: the Trump administration, on the one hand, thought about designating the Muslim Brotherhood. President Trump, at the breakout of the Gulf crisis, initially called Qatar a support of terrorism. All of a sudden, he switched those positions. He pushed the Alula agreement very hard. He claimed that that would lead to reconciliation and tougher anti-Iran position by all and lot, which was very obviously never going to happen. And now we see that Qatar is in a position to contribute to a resurgence of brotherhood through financial means, through ideological support, through intelligence operations, through all these things. So on the other hand, on the one hand, the Trump administration presented itself as pro-Israel, pro-regional integration, pro-Saudi Arabia as a strong geopolitical ally of the United States, pro-reconciliation with various countries in business. But on the other hand, it has pushed a contradictory policy that has led to, quite frankly, the end of any conversations about better improved relations between some of those countries and Israel. Without a question, the battle has been complicated by Qatar's involvement. Certainly, there were no steps taken to hold Qatar individually accountable for anything at all. And since then, it has even gotten worse under Biden. So Qatar, in fact, has been designated as a major non-NATO ally. And while nobody forced Biden to do that, the fact that the previous administration pushed Qatar as a potential ally to Middle Eastern states certainly facilitated that happening. How can we talk about major differences between political parties in the US when they are ultimately pursuing the same policies?
You make a fantastic point, because I have thought about this a lot. I know that there are honorable members of Congress. I know that for a fact. One of my absolute heroes in this world is former Congressman Frank Wolf, for example. Congressman Frank Wolf from Virginia is one of the greatest heroes in American history, as far as I'm concerned. So there are very, very, like Dave Bratt, Congressman Dave Bratt from Virginia, absolute hero. He's no longer in Congress. But I have met Ted Cruz is fantastic. I have met members of Congress who truly, truly do believe in this and are extremely more frustrated than you are. I know this. I know this. The problem is there is more freedom within the Republican Party for lawmakers to act independently. I have spoken to a member of Congress, a Democrat, a member of Congress, about the Muslim Brotherhood, and he was finishing my sentences. He knew all about it. He was finishing. He knew so much about their involvement in terrorism. He should be an expert in the field. And then I told him, so are you going to co-sponsor the bill that designates the Muslim Brothers terrorist group? Guess what he said? He said, of course not, because I only sponsor bills that the DNC tells me to sponsor. So that's what is happening inside the Democratic Party right from the horse's mouth. That's an actual conversation, and I actually have a witness for that conversation. I'm not going to name the gentleman, but that conversation took place. So the DNC controls the policy. There is a little bit of hope in the Republican Party because they can act on their own. They can. But still, there is a very rotten establishment and bureaucracy inside the party. And you saw it very clearly during President Trump's administration. There was that he was getting, sometimes he was getting more pushback from Republicans than Democrats when he tried to do something on his own. So I believe there is hope in the Republican Party. There is a little bit of hope.
At the end of the day, the Muslim Brotherhood clearly sees the trends within the two political parties due to their very high-level political involvement. They've been intelligent enough to try to rise through the ranks politically, mostly on the Democrat side, but some of them have also tried to infiltrate the Republican Party by whatever means that they could. And they're smart in that they don't always aim for the highest office. They go through low-ranking positions all over the country. They make alliances with whoever they can. So given the fact that they don't necessarily, we've talked about the intelligence agencies doing their vetting, but that's but what about the educational system? What about the media? What about other soft power institutions, not to mention political governance? We can't, unless we start a huge commission to investigate every person running for office for signs of Muslim Brotherhood, and this has been tried with the Communist Party back in the day, and it failed. It failed because the communists themselves were able to subvert it by turning into by playing the victim card in that whole process, and by using extremely inefficient government officials to that end, and it completely backfired. So how can we avoid the appearance of a political witch hunt in going after these ideologues and their proxies, when the breadth of their infiltration is so vast, and when they've allied themselves with so many coalitions?
So that's another fantastic question, because I thought about this a lot as well. There is a point where I should start to ignore the cry bullies, okay? The cry bullies are going to be cry bullies about anything. But at the same time, you can start with a very successful strategy. Go after the professor who was involved in mass murder. Anyone who defends that is a monster. Very hard to defend a Muslim Brotherhood member who was involved in the murder of 506 people. Go after an actor, a Hollywood actor, who's a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, who was involved in torture on video, and I have the video. I discuss it in my book. A Hollywood actor who was featured in Lucy and Syriana, Amra Waked, is a torturer and a monster. When you go after someone on video engaging in torture, I don't think you get a lot of pushback. Start with these awful, awful examples that are very easy to get people to understand why they have to be stopped. And we need a serious education campaign across the board to make it more acceptable. Now, there are partisans who are never going to accept. They would ally with bin Laden against Republicans. I've seen Democrats who a Democrat actually told me that. So these people, you can't worry about them. We are at an intellectual war. It's an intellectual battle. It's not a battle that can be won in any other way except with education, spreading the information about this horrific group and what it's doing in America. And then later, when you start to purge the government institution from these operatives, it's going to be less severe, in my opinion. I don't see any other way.
Let's not focus on the lost causes such as Democratic officials, but let's talk about the Republicans. Republican funders, on the one hand, claim that they oppose all these institutions, and they found very ineffective, in my opinion, fringe and semi-fringe publications aimed at their own base. On the other hand, when there is real effort, intellectual effort, academic effort to take action against these entities and individuals and coalitions, the funding seems to not be available. How do we explain that? How do we change that? How do we reach the people who, for whatever reason, choose to devote themselves to superficial efforts rather than deep, long-term intellectual efforts that it takes to bring down entire institutions.
Because you said it, they're superficial. They themselves are superficial. They want to say that, oh, I'm funding this famous cause, I'm funding that famous cause. They're not interested in the long battle. This is a long battle. You are dealing with a very unconventional foe. The Brotherhood thinks in terms of centuries, not just years or decades. So when you look at these donors and how superficial, not all of them, I know that there are very honorable people as well who are frustrated. But the think tanks not just only get funds from American donors, they also get funds from Qatar. So they have to balance it where they can keep both donors happy. So that's a problem that you have, is the foreign funding. And I'm writing an article that's going to come out soon about this issue, about the Qatari funding to these think tanks. And that prohibits the conversation. You know, with all my knowledge about the Muslim Brotherhood, most think tanks refuse to ally with me, refuse to host me, conservative think tanks, with the exception of the Middle East Forum, of course, which is incredible. And oh my God, they are the most intellectually and morally honest institution I have seen in America. These guys, the president can disagree with me and publish my pieces that disagree with him. You don't see that in any other think tank, to be honest with you. There are other think tanks that are also great, but the vast majority would never touch someone like me, almost boycott me because of my discourse about the Brotherhood, because they're getting funds from Qatar.
How do they explain it? Out of curiosity, how do they justify not addressing these topics or inviting you? What's the explanation? Have you had conversations in those circles?
Oh, they tell me to my face there is no evidence that the Muslim Brotherhood engaged in terrorism.
But now that you're ready to present your findings, do you expect that perspective to change?
I think it will change, not because they are morally or intellectually honest, but because their donors will tell them, step up your game. That's why it will change. I don't have a lot of faith, honestly, in that world. Of course, there are incredible people that I know personally, incredible scholars. So much, I can't even name them all. But there is a substantial amount that are honestly intellectual prostitutes for the highest bidder. So when this information reaches its donors, hopefully they will start saying, okay, they will force them to talk about the Brotherhood.
Your story is extremely compelling because up to now, the discourse about the Muslim Brotherhood has been focused on data, on laws, on political discussions, on broad implications. But here you have a very compelling personal story of encountering, confronting these people, having a deep personal impact on them. And these are the sort of stories that are the most dangerous in the current climate, because frankly, a lot of the human element, this is what works. People are tired of, not everyone will want to read a long article or even a book, but when they hear personal encounters, they stop thinking. They stop to think. They identify with these personal stories, and it's a great way to illustrate your point and grabs attention. How could all of these people deny your story? It's one thing to claim that, oh, well, how can they deny your experiences given the climate where personal experiences are a top priority, even especially in democratic stories? How can your personal story not serve as a starting point for these conversations? I can understand how they would choose to ignore statistics or data or some, intellectual particular sources from Arab countries, but how can they deny direct experience?
So because some people, I'm not the type of victim they like. I do not identify as a victim. I identify as a victor, not a victim. So they don't like that. They don't like, oh, that I have to go on shows and say, oh, woe is me. No, it's a story of perseverance. It's not a story of surrender. And in the culture of fetishizing victimhood, that doesn't really play well. They do not want that narrative. They want the story where someone, oh, I want to kill myself, and I'm so sad. But they do not want that you have persevered and that you're happy now and that you're successful, you're fighting them and you're going to win eventually. They do not want that. They want to focus on the cry bully. And then when you go into the intersectionality, they prioritize their victims depending on their race, depending on their ideology, on their religion. And I don't fit that narrative. I do not fit that narrative at all. Although I'm an immigrant, they do not, I don't fit the cry bully narrative. Because unless the perpetrator is a white American, they're not interested.
But kicking back again to the conservatives, you, for them, are a perfect retort to all the other similar efforts from the other side. Instead of fighting over nonsense and being married in really petty political issues, this is a perfect response to the efforts by the other side. This is how you answer them, by presenting a compelling human being who is successful, who doesn't have to be, to fake it, who has this story and who has this very moving, both an intellectual background and a moving personal story. Why aren't they promoting that aspect of it, even if they don't get the whole picture?
I don't know. I truly do not know the answer to this question. And I know partially why. When I first came, I can't tell you the experiences I've had when I came to America. I came to America 3 weeks after my failed assassination attempt. I came to this country not knowing where I was going to spend the night. I literally just landed, and a country I've never visited, and I just came to America. I was so traumatized. And because I started speaking about the Muslim Brotherhood, many conservative think tanks, with the exception, of course, of the Middle East Forum, were fighting me. Because they weren't agreeing with my narrative. They were shunning me. They were fighting me. They were stalking me. I had someone stalk me. I had someone hack into my computer. I've been so traumatized after I came to this country, and they were jealous. They thought I'm here to take their place. I'm not taking everybody plays a great role. Everybody can contribute. I want 1,000 people saying what I'm saying. I want 1 million people saying the same thing. I don't look at it. I'm not competing. It's not a competition. We're one team. Anyone who agrees with me about the Brotherhood is in my team. But I wasn't viewed this way. I was truly traumatized with the way I was treated when I first came to America by a lot of our so-called allies.
So we have a very deep-rooted problem. Not only do we have a problem of adversarial forces taking over entire institutions, and a Democratic Party that's essentially, has become, if not a proxy, then at very least a very useful dupe for these groups. We have Republicans who place their own petty grievances over what should be a much larger, bigger picture and bigger things. And this is something that's self-destructive.
It's oh my God. I have seen pettiness in these circles. It's like watching the Kardashians or something. It's like that. I'm serious. And men, they talk about women's clothes and they talk about, oh, they're jealous, and it's insane. It's insane. It's a horrible, horrible, horrible culture because the mainstream culture is bad. So it's affecting Republicans as well. The whole culture is very, very broken. So it's not an easy battle, but we have to start somewhere.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. Personally, I'm so incredibly excited to read your book. By the way, speaking of which, where can the readers find it? What is the best way to find it?
Well, you can find it on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, all major book stores carry it online. You can pre-order it right now. It will be officially released on September 27th, but you can definitely pre-order the book now.
Just a question. Did you face any problems in the publication process? Because we know that both the book publishers and the book sellers these days have their own agendas, and we've all heard of people being canceled or simply not being able to publish at all.
Oh, you know everything about everything, don't you?
I wish.
It's like, what is this? What is this? You know everything about everything. Yes, it was a crazy, the way the book was published was crazy. So I have a wonderful agent, okay? So my agent was pitching it to all these sources. The replies were so horrible that she wouldn't send them to me. She was so horrified by what people were saying about the book and about me that she said, I can't tell you what they said. She's a very, very sweet English woman, and she was horrified. And I was talking to my husband and I told him, you know what? My dream editor is Adam Bellow. I should contact him myself. He's an editor at Bombardier Books. And I told him, he's my dream editor. And my husband said, oh, it's not a good idea for authors to go after editors on their social media. It's a terrible idea. I told him I'm not going to stalk him. I'm just going to send him a nice little message. And he said, no, let's not do it. Let's keep trying first the traditional way with your agent. A week later, I get a message out of nowhere from Adam Bellow. And he says, oh, we want to publish a book. Are you interested in writing a book? I told him, I have a book. I have a book for you. And that's how the book was published by Bombardier, because Adam Bellow is a serious visionary. And that's why he was my favorite editor. And it happened, it was like a miracle the way it happened. That a week later, it's crazy. It's a crazy story, and that's why the book was published. If it wasn't for him, no, I would have had to self-publish it. Because all the big five will say, oh, Islamophobia, this. Although the vast majority of my supporters and readers are Muslim, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Muslim, oh my God, I can't tell you the support. It's mainly from Muslims. They can't wait for the book. Egyptian media is constantly sending me, we want to read this, we want that, we want constant interviews, they translate my work, and because they're desperate, because the first people who get slaughtered by the Brotherhood are Muslims, actually. So it's so easy to talk to them. It's so easy to talk to them than any other group.
By the way, do you think the publisher's response would have been different had you been a Muslim author? Or do you think they would still have made up some other, criteria to disqualify?
No, they wouldn't have accepted it at all. because they think that the Muslim Brotherhood is a victim group.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of their it's one of their victim groups. So even if I was Muslim, they wouldn't have published it at all. They would not. I actually I'm sure of that, because I have a lot of Muslims who get persecuted in America because of their views against the Brotherhood. You can't believe the messages I get. The gut wrenching. One guy made me cry because of how oppressed he is, because he's a Muslim who speaks against the Muslim Brotherhood. He was beaten at a mosque. He lost his job. They are persecuted by the Brotherhood here.
Well, these people need a platform. If they ever want to speak out, please do send them my way, because unfortunately,
I try. They
Mhm.
refuse. They refuse.
They're afraid of going on the record.
They don't. The guy who told me he was beaten, he told me he was even afraid to file a police report. They're terrified. They're more scared than any other group. They are truly scared of the Brotherhood, more than any other group, more than Christians, more than Jews, more than Yazidis. They tell me you can do it because you're not Muslim, but we can't speak like you.
Well, the problem I see is that these guys, they don't have protection, they don't have a support network, they don't have funding, and they certainly don't have any means of defending themselves against, physically or otherwise, against Muslim Brotherhood.
None.
But there should be something. First of all, there should be training, self-defense training for people who wish to speak out available. Second, there should be, of course, political support. And they, the fact that we have reached a state where crimes can be committed against someone and the victim is the one afraid of this organized crime activity, this is completely unacceptable, and it should not even be close to reality. But
it doesn't even sound real, but I know.
I believe you. I believe you 100%. Unfortunately, because unfortunately,
Yeah, look, I want to be wrong about everything I say.
mhm.
Everything I say, I'm actually more sad when I'm right. Because when I'm right means things are really bad. I want to be wrong. I want all of this to be not true.
The one thing that there should exist is a matchmaking program between people like that and maybe religious authorities, imams, or whoever who are anti-brotherhood, or at least not politically involved in any way, who can offer them some sort of a community support, and who can, as a religious leader, speak out against that sort of hatred and bigotry and internal community problems. That is something that needs to happen, because they need a place and they need, support from within. Someone like me, I can give them a voice, but I can't protect them. I can't, and I'm not a religious authority and not from their community. So that is not something that, in that way cannot be helpful. But creating such networks for people who wish to speak out but afraid of for their opposition, because this is how the Brotherhood operates. They make people believe that they are the only ones who matter, and that opposition does not exist. They deny the fact that opposition exists and that they don't represent Muslims.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And to be honest with you, I do not feel comfortable asking these guys to speak out, because they end up in bad situations. So as you said, unless there is a framework that provides them protection and legitimacy, where they won't lose their jobs, where there's not going to be repercussions against them, because the way, for example, when you're an immigrant here, the way you get a job is through someone you know.
Sure.
And the Muslim Brotherhood controls so much of the Arab businesses, and they have so much control. So even if they're not afraid of being assaulted or killed, they're afraid of losing money or getting shunned out of the community. So this so many layers. But the way to counter it is to stop the brotherhood. People like that can just breathe and emerge in civil society and flourish and have a voice and show an alternative version of Islam that's peaceful, that can coexist. Like the one we had in Egypt forever until 1952. There was no such thing as Muslim and Christian until 1952, which is the Brotherhood, Muslim Brotherhood coup d'etat. That there was complete peace. There wasn't any of these issues at all. It was unheard. So it all comes down to the same thing. They have to be designated as a terrorist group.
Well, I think that this is at the very least an excellent start, and I hope it inspires many more people to follow your footsteps, to continue your academic work. It's not a competition. It's like any area. There's an endless supply for conversation, continuing conversation. It's no fun talking to yourself. You want the academic work to shine, to be cited. It's not a competition at all. It's a collaborative effort. It's
Of
like,
course it is. And I honestly am a reluctant participant in this war. I'm an artist. I was dragged into this fight. I wish someone else was doing what I'm doing and 10 times better than me, so I can focus on the things that I love. I was forced to get into this fight. I want people to be 10 times more successful than I am, so I can do the stuff that I like to do. It's absolutely not a competition. I want others to be better than me, so I can have the luxury to stop this war.
I hope that whatever I can do to amplify your message will attract the attention that this topic needs, the support that you more than earned, and the battle that needs an army, not just armies of one, however brilliant. It needs an army to battle an army.
Well, I can't agree more.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm very much looking forward to reading your book. I hope the listeners will check out The Secret Apparatus by Cynthia Farahat. And for those who've joined us for the Washington Outsider Report this week on the Coalition Radio, please stay tuned to our future programs. Next week we'll be back at the usual time at 9 p.m. No topic is too taboo to discuss. I look forward to many more programs with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.